Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
Just so you know, this is not the greatest podcast in the world. No, it's just a tribute.
Oh, man.
Well, welcome once again to another episode of Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast. My name is Jim, and I'm a record store owner.
And I'm Steve, a record collector.
And Steve, we're paying tribute on this Memorial Day weekend. Obviously, here in the U.S., it's Memorial Day. A very serious holiday, by the way, but we're going to take the lighter side to the vinyl side and talk about tribute albums coming up.
So we're going to take Memorial Day to the dark side and take that seriousness and totally toss it all out. Okay, I'm liking it already.
We can do that, I think
right.
so. But before we do that, as always, folks, and I like to hear what you've picked up this week and added to the collection.
I got in two albums that totally I was super excited about because they reissued them. The first two, Spaceman 3. Now, the first one was Spaceman 3, Sound of Confusion, and it had just the coolest song, Hey Man, on there. And in the 60s, there was a movie of Sidney Poitier called Lilies of the Field, and he had a song on there called Amen. Amen, amen. Hey, this is now American Idol, if you heard that. Just so you know, I'm here. So they took that and took the exact same thing and made it into Hey Man instead of Amen. And it is just awesome. But then the other one was their second one, The Perfect Prescription. I had bought an original from you. And in your personal collection, and I'm not going to find that original cover. I mean, what's the chance of that? So they reissued this, and I was able to get that. So
it's one of the vinyl that you saved from the flood,
right? Yes, it is. It's one of the vinyls I saved, you bet, because it's such a great album.
And I remember that was a rare one.
It's a very rare one, yes. And it's still rare. The cover's even more rare because there's one less out there. And the final one from one of the people that shop here and a friend of ours, Steve Bales, he posted on Facebook. He goes, "Hey Steve Carlson, look at this," and it was a 2-record set called Strum and Thrum American Jangle Pop from '83 to '87. And he baited me with this thing. It just, what a guy. And I looked at it, and it's perfect. It's just that wonderful music, that we like, personally, this college rock, just that jangle rock going on. And it's really neat. It comes with a great book. Also, it brings up all these artists that you may not know about, and their records are cheap out there. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Cool. That's a good ad.
How about you?
Well, I had a neat week, a few upgrades, but a couple of new additions. The first being a Royal Tenenbaum soundtrack. Now, this was a Record Store Day release back last year. And we had it here at the store, but we had limited copies because it's Record Store Day. And, I'm the type of guy, it's like, well, I really want this. I'm a fan of the film. But we only had a couple, and they sold. And I figured someday I'll find it again. Well, I found it again. So I passed on a Record Store Day. I didn't use that prerogative that record store owners aren't supposed to do, but I did get a copy. The only vinyl version that's out there is that 2022 RSD release, and it's got a lot of great stuff. The Stones are on there, Nico. I know you know.
Well, but I used to have that on CD, and it was really good. There's some great stuff on there. Yeah.
Then the other one was a new reissue from Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane, and that the album was Thelonious Monk with John Coltrane. It was originally released in 1961. But this new one is part of that Kraft Jazz reissue series. Holy cow, does that sound good. I'm still learning my way with a lot of this older jazz, but you cannot go wrong with those two big names. I mean, that's right up there with Davis in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So from our broadcast on, records, this more of this better the audiophile stuff. Look at you just jump into that with that jazz, that Kraft. That's good.
It's a Kraft one, and it's not super expensive either, which is the case of a lot of these, but they're doing a lot of great reissues on 180-gram vinyl, and this thing just sounds so fantastic. And it's great. And the upgrades I got this week, I upgraded a Kinks Sleepwalker, added that. I love the 80s Kinks. I know the 70s stuff was really good. Their 60s stuff is fantastic, but there's something about the 80s Kinks that just draws me in. And then the other one was an upgrade. I had a mono version of the Yardbirds over, under, sideways, down, and I found a stereo version comparable in quality as far as the wear on the vinyl. So I went with the stereo.
Okay.
And upgraded that. So some fun stuff.
So now I may have to buy Thelonious Monk and Coltrane. Oh, man. Okay. Interesting.
Well, Steve, I think now is the right time to say, let's pay tribute with tribute albums. Now, this, in my mind, when we talked about this subject, it's easy to get sidetracked, I think, down that road of cover tunes or cover songs on albums. So one of the albums I saw in your Sunday video this morning on your YouTube channel was that REM, an early REM B-sides that is a lot of different cover tunes. Some great stuff on there, including that Roger Miller, King of the Road. But that is a cover tune, which a lot of bands do. And in my mind, that differs a little bit from albums or artists that pay tribute to other albums or artists with their work.
Yeah, and I know when we were discussing kind of, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how this goes, but then I began thinking about it. And there's been these tribute, albums like that going on for decades. Especially you think back to early jazz.
Yep.
Jazz musicians constantly, would go back, especially of Duke Ellington, of Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, whole tributes we're going to do. Because we're going to play his music, their music, jazz standards.
Yep. And a lot of that too, and this is in the cover side of things, blues artists were always doing and redoing other folks' work. But again, those in my mind are pretty much cover versions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great cover bands out there, ones that just do covers. The one that we had talked about, and we will do a cover show. How's that at some point? Our favorite cover band or cover songs throughout there. But Me First and the Gimme Gimmes.
Yes.
It is a punk group that does just phenomenal cover versions of songs. And they have, I think in a couple of instances, done an entire album that's been a tribute to something. But primarily, I would consider them a cover band of their own right. Then you get somebody like Richard Cheese, which we've talked about a little bit here in the store, who does lounge cover versions, but not really specific on an album. It's just whatever music happens to come to mind. And then you get these other kind of niche, like a bluegrass one. There's a band out there called Steven Seagulls, Steve and Seagulls, that does really kind of, it's hard to describe, almost like a heavier punk bluegrass version of stuff, where they have done Beastie Boys Sabotage and AC/DC's Thunderstruck. Really cool stuff if you can find that online. But then you take this other direction. There's another band out there called Hayseed Dixie.
Yep, I used to have those CDs.
Okay, which is a bluegrass, and they do AC/DC.
Yes. Yeah. It's really pretty darn funny, too. Though after a while, you can only take so much of it. And then you just, and again, we're not going into that, but when you just think of these tribute bands and all that's out there. I was like the Grateful Dead. There's over 300 Grateful Dead tribute bands. And some of them have the exact same name, but it's, they call it like Dancing Bear, Vermont, Dancing Bear, California. It's just nuts.
Now, on the subject of tribute bands, we'll get back to the albums here in a little bit, but on the subject of tribute bands, this is, I think, a really neat phenomenon. Now, let's take a band like Brit Floyd. I saw them back in 2016, and they blew me away. But I never had the chance. Well, I take that back. I had a chance to see Pink Floyd, and I blew it because I was busy working and being an adult and didn't get a chance to go see them in the early 90s when I probably should have. But that's always been kind of a regret. I never got to see Pink Floyd. But when I saw Brit Floyd perform down in Saginaw here in our area, several years ago, I was blown away. My take on tribute bands of that caliber, at least, are such that you're not going to get a chance to see Pink Floyd, the 60s, 70s Pink Floyd, ever again. Many people did. I did not. I don't know if you ever had a chance to.
I had a chance in the mid-'80s. I had a friend, hey, Pink Floyd's coming to town. You want to go see it? How much are tickets? He told me the price. I'm not going to pay that much for a ticket. Well, he was a huge Pink Floyd fan. He went, I didn't go, and he said it's just the greatest thing in the whole wide world. And no, I've never saw them.
And the friend of mine that went and invited me in the 90s came back and said it was the greatest. He went to Iowa to see him, of all places. And the night they were doing it, they were playing Dark Side of the Moon, and a full moon rose up over the venue, and he was tickled pink.
That's where I would have, and it was in Iowa in the mid '80s. So Pink Floyd loved Iowa. I mean,
apparently,
yes. I mean, not only is it heaven for Field of Dreams, but it's Pink Floyd country.
If you play it, they will come.
Yes.
But the tribute band in this case, when I saw Brit Floyd in Saginaw, and I said, I'm not kidding when I say it blew me away. It was probably one of the loudest shows I've ever seen, where the air pressure was still pushing my hair back. But the technical aspect of it was phenomenal. Now, great to say that Pink Floyd could do this with 4 members. Yes, Pink Floyd was awesome. And it took Brit Floyd I think they probably had 8 or 9 members in the band, including backup singers. Yeah. But the technical nature of it was such that they could just cover these Floyd tunes phenomenally. Now, you're not going to see a lot of these older bands, because members have passed on or they're just too old, or in the case of somebody like David Lee Roth and Van Halen, his voice just isn't there anymore. And it's a little, I don't want to use the word sad, but I don't know what else to use when they perform in this nature. But these tribute bands, you can see, especially if they're technically correct, you can hear what they sounded like back then and at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, Brit Floyd's still out there. I just saw a video from a person in the vinyl community. They were in Cleveland. They were just in Cleveland, right down by the docks. And as Brit Floyd is playing, there's a big cargo ship going right behind them. It was pretty cool. I've gone to a few, but it's like, man, I don't know. And it's will it be the same? But as you explained it, it is your chance to at least hear the music, and if they do a good job of it, what's the difference?
Now, there's some bands, cover bands, that not only try to recreate the music. Brit Floyd does not attempt to recreate the look of Pink Floyd. They don't come out in costume like some of these Beatles tributes bands. 1964, any number of them come out in the various stages of the Beatles eras, and they try to look the look and play the song. Brit Floyd just comes out and plays the music. But there are others. There's a venue in Saginaw called The Vault that brings in cover bands and tribute bands all the time. I'm looking at their website right now, and just on their more current schedule, they've got a group called Bloodstone, which is Michigan's Judas Priest tribute. And then right after that, they've got one called Daytime Friends. And I would never have guessed, but there is a Kenny Rogers tribute act out there called Daytime Friends. And then we get the Prince Experience and something called Captain Fantastic, who I would assume looks the part of Elton John at a certain era. Crazy Babies, which is an Ozzy Osbourne tribute. And it goes on and on. So you can hear the music and see these acts pretending to be. I don't know where I am on the whole pretending to be, because that feels a little too close to these bands. But in a lot of cases, these are all licensed by the artists or the labels to be these imitations.
Okay. Like Elvis Presley.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How many of those are there, huh?
Lots.
10,000 Elvis Presley tribute.
Now, there's another direction that this can go, and we hinted at this with these novelty bands. There's one I brought your attention to called Mac Sabbath.
Yeah.
And did you watch a couple of those videos?
Yeah, I did.
Now, this is to the extreme. Think Gwar, the heavy metal group Gwar with their alien monster costumes, and transfer that into these big plastic costumes of McDonald's food and characters. And then Mac Sabbath singing Black Sabbath tunes with the lyrics surrounding McDonald's food items. And it's bizarre.
They've been down in Detroit and playing. I've seen video footage. There's a guy I know down there that goes to all these concerts, and he's done a lot of footage of them. I go, what the hell is that? The first time through, he tells me, all right, I guess it's a thing.
It is a thing. Their lead singer looks like an evil clown version of Ronald McDonald.
Yeah.
And then they got their drummer as the Hamburglar. So it's very, very strange. But you can take these tribute acts to that bizarro extreme.
Yeah, very true.
So the other side of this then would be tribute albums, where a band or a various artists pay tribute to a certain album by a group or just a certain group. And there's tons of these things out here as well. one of the biggest ones and one of the most interesting ones, and I think I showed this to you a while ago, was the Flaming Lips and Henry Rollins doing an entire cover version of Dark Side of the Moon in their own styles. They're not trying to copy it. They're just, kind of passing their style on. And that's interesting. Is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, put their own take on it, their own spin on it. Yeah, they're out there. I just haven't ever really jumped into a lot of these because, like Dark Side of the Moon, what are you going to do to it? It scares me a little bit.
Well, there's that reggae version that's out there as well, which was cool, but again, it's a novelty.
Yeah. And everyone wants to, they have albums that they grew up with, a lot of artists, and they want to do something with it, and they want to maybe pay tribute to that. Sometimes it works. A lot of times you just kind of shake your head and go, well, let's move on to your next project.
Now, there's this band called Brownout from Austin, Texas, that we both have been kind of tuned into and turned on to of late. And they are an act in their own right with their own music, but they've done 2 albums that pay tribute to Black Sabbath, a Brown Sabbath Volume 1 and a Brown Sabbath Volume 2. And I just love these things. They're great.
I showed that on my early morning show today, and I had so many comments of, I got to find this thing. I got to look for this thing because, Black Sabbath with congos and funk and horns, really phenomenal. It just took that darkness and just brought light to it in an exciting way, but yet with a lead singer that sounds like Ozzy Osbourne.
And I think that's key. You don't want to be an exact copy.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go that other end where you're in a Ronald McDonald suit kind of making fun of it at the same time. But if the tribute bands come to their own right and they're not dressing like, they're not doing a specific straight up imitation, I think that's where they find their groove, so to speak. And the Brown Sabbath albums by Brownout, in my opinion, really do work.
Yeah, I would. Now, they did do that when we played samples of Public Enemy. Mm-hmm. And for me, now that one didn't, because Public Enemy, it's all about samples and the noise. And you can't, that one's hard to replicate. It just didn't work. But I would love to get that first Black Sabbath, on Brown Sabbath. Someone said it was on Record Store Day.
It was a Record Store Day, and I don't know how I missed it. It got by me, and I'm really feeling bad because we probably could have had a few copies here in the store. But, we'll find it.
Yep.
And I think that I remember seeing it was a Record Store Day first, which means that they're going to reissue it at some point. Now, the only thing that, in going back and looking at that one from Record Store Day, it was a double LP on 45 RPM. So it's one of those that gets annoying a little bit. So hopefully if they do reissue that first Brown Sabbath, it'll be it's just a single LP 33. At 33, which will be great. But there's something about the Sabbath. You mentioned it didn't work for Public Enemy, but it did for Black Sabbath. And it's kind of hard to explain with us talking about why it would work versus you listening to it and saying, holy cow, does that work? Are there other cover or tribute albums that work for you?
Or they just an artist takes a whole album and kind of it puts most of the ones that I've had were just multiple artists doing the whole thing, and there was a lot of those that came out, and I mean I bought those up. I bought those, a lot of them. As far as with a single one, I never really bought much of that. It was just, that would be, if I have their catalog, I would generally ignore that one because, well, they're just taking something else. Yep. But I know you get into, you have some that you've really liked.
I do have some. We have one that's been kind of bouncing between my collection and the store's inventory because I can't decide if I want to keep it. And it's a tribute to Neil Young. But the catch is it's done by all female artists.
Okay.
And it's really neat because it takes Young's work and very familiar songs and just puts that different indie sound to it. Mm-hmm. The other one that really comes to mind, I've got the one that's a tribute to Rocky Erickson, however we want to say that, which is very interesting music. And the Erickson and 13th Floor Elevators catalog is so limited that once you hear it and hear it again, you're like, that's a good song. But now you can hear alternate versions of that by the likes of Matthew Sweet and ZZ Top. And it's very odd to hear them playing his and the 13th Floor Elevators music, but it's very cool.
Now, when you look at so those kind of albums where they play a multiple songs from their catalog. Now, those I had a lot on CDs when they weren't looking at a specific album like a Dark Side of the Moon. And so, I mean, some of the biggest ones I remember that I used to have was Inconium, was a tribute to Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
That was big. The Bridge, which was the tribute to Neil Young, that one came out in '89. There was Two Rooms celebrating Elton John and Bernie Taupin.
Yep.
That was in '91. Stone Free, tribute to Jimi Hendrix. And again, I'm not sure the year of that one. If I Were a Carpenter came out in '94.
With all alternative artists. I've got some of those on my iPod.
And
so.
that one still haunts me because someone did a Calling All Extraterrestrials. They did a cover of that.
Yep.
And it was an earworm, and I couldn't get it out of my head for a couple days. I swear to God, they called in extraterrestrials. They went into my brain. It was bad. It wouldn't leave me. It was Killer Queen, tribute to Queen.
Yep.
You remember that one? Yep. That came out. There were Rolling Stone, Blue and Lonesome. Yep. Then there's the Red Hot and Blue tribute to Cole Porter for the AIDS research. That was huge, and I had that. And one of the biggest ones was dedicated a tribute to the Grateful Dead. I had no Grateful Dead. I didn't know much about the Grateful Dead. There was a number of their songs that I didn't know was done by them, but other artists had done. I really liked. They did their cover versions. But I bought this CD and go, wow, this is some pretty good stuff.
If I remember, that one has an Indigo Girls cover on there of Uncle John's Band, which is always a great one to hit.
It does. And I did not go out and buy tie-dye shirts after playing it, but it was pretty good.
You didn't go on the road following them around.
Yeah, no.
Give up the job.
Well, I tried, and I got about a block away, and I go, what am I doing? I'm okay now. I got away from the CD. I'm going back home.
A lot of these that you mentioned were brought together, like you were saying, for the AIDS research as well. That brings the artists out to really record these and make a memorable album together. But there's another side of this that when I did some more research that's a little on the, let's say, shadier side of gathering these artists together. And I see these in our distributor websites every time they come out. They say, oh, this is a tribute album is coming out to AC/DC or Pink Floyd. And the one thing they have in common is it's called The Many Faces Of. And digging into this, these are all newer. It is a whole series by a label called The Many Faces Of, which gathers together all of these artists doing other people's work. And I don't know whether they get the audio files. They don't record them. Okay. In a lot of cases, I think these artists may be in a recording session, and the label may own the work and say, why don't you just voice this one, lay down a vocal track for this particular song. What a lot of these Many Faces Of, and people have pointed out to me, contain, some of these artists have died, and this album may have come out now, but the lead singer singing this AC/DC song died several years ago. So in looking this up, the Many Faces Of label, according to Discogs, is a tribute series that comes from an Argentinian-based label called Music Brokers. And right in the Discogs description, they say, many of these have questionable legality. Some releases have even been denounced as bootlegs by the artists. So what this Music Brokers does is they specialize in the re-release of popular genres of a variety of artists and or musicians worldwide covering other folks' stuff. And they get their audio from wherever they get their audio, whether it be from a live performance, a bootleg live performance, and then they compile these all together in these releases. And looking down their list, I see The Many Faces of AC/DC, the ultimate tribute to AC/DC. And it's got artists that you never really hear of, and then some that you do. You get Jolynn Turner on here. You get Quiet Riot doing Highway to Hell. And then you get somebody like Bang Tango or Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. And then you've got a full other album of Gordy, which was Brian Johnson's first band.
Okay.
Not really even AC/DC. So this label picks up these mishmash of recordings and plops them all together because they are a certain artist's song. So we see the many faces of Pink Floyd, the many faces of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, the Ramones, Guns N' Roses, the Doors. Their list goes on and on. It looks like there's a total of over 90 releases from this particular one that does this with questionable legality.
I wonder if they're based out of Europe where the copyright laws are a lot less or a lot more lenient, and you can start taking that stuff and using it. It becomes public.
It is.
Domain.
It says that they're Argentinian, so maybe they have those same rules down there.
I would almost bet. So it opens it up that they can do that. In the U.S., they wouldn't. Our copyright laws are a lot stricter.
But these things are made available to us as a record store. I can order them legitimately through our distributors, knowing that they come from this questionable. Yeah. So I guess basically beware if you see the many faces of on an album and you really love that group and you want to be a completist and say, I don't really care if these are cover bands or Dee Snider or whoever's singing these. I want all of this stuff from the band, then it's cool. But otherwise, I'd say beware.
Yeah, there's no way I'm going to jump into that rabbit hole. But no doubt someone has. They like them. Go, oh, this is great. Well, you got 90 more to go, so I guess they just have to get a hold of you, and you can order them for them.
Sure thing. But at some point, though, you can't call these tribute albums because the ones that you mentioned, the Elton John, the Led Zeppelin, they're artists legitimately paying tribute.
Yes.
Versus just some hodgepodge of crap tossed together by a label looking to make a buck. Mm-hmm. That's really not a tribute. That's a give me your money.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that's.
Coming down to it, though, I would say that I'm more of a fan of cover tunes than I am of tribute albums, even though I do own a few of them, the Dark Side of the Moon ones that we mentioned, and that Rocky Erickson and the Neil Young. I really prefer it when artists do toss a cover tune in from time to time.
Yeah, I agree on that totally. It makes it fun. It's kind of exciting. I just remember growing up, there was all these, Grand Funk, they did Locomotion. I thought they made that song for years and years. Then I find out, what? That was a cover tune from the 60s? I had no idea. I never had heard it. And you find that out. Los Lobos had a number of covers that they did that I loved. And I find out they were cover tunes. But when they do it right, they make it their own. And that's what really makes it exciting. You can get a critic and they go, oh, you can't do that. That's not right. You took that song and you changed it up. But so often they put their own spin on it and it really comes out fantastic.
One of the groups, and I can't believe I'm kind of kicking myself here, that we should have talked about a little earlier, because there's a couple of records in my collection there, and that's Dred Zeppelin. I should have brought that up earlier, and maybe that's a good point to wrap up on in talking about how you can take a group like Led Zeppelin, and they're iconic, and then you have a band that's been around since the 80s that plays reggae versions of Led Zeppelin, and their lead singer is an overweight Elvis impersonator. Is that a tribute? and if so, to whom?
Yeah, I was going to say, if I'm Robert Plant, I can't say that's a tribute.
But toward Elvis, one of my favorites, though, they do and I will call it a mashup. And if you are unfamiliar with what that term is, look it up, because that's a whole nother subject and a whole nother rabbit hole to get down into. But the song Heartbreaker from Led Zeppelin is covered by Dred Zeppelin. But instead of singing the lyrics to Heartbreaker, Toward Elvis sings the lyrics to Heartbreak Hotel to the tune of Heartbreaker. Done in reggae style.
Let's just make it super confusing.
Just because.
But they made it their own. Now it becomes something original.
And let's pay tribute in that fashion to all of these great artists, but with watching out for that Argentinian label.
Yes, those darn Argentinians.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening to Two Guys Talking About Records, a Vinyl Community podcast. Anything else you wanted to add, Steve?
I do not. You know what? It was an interesting discussion, and there are a lot of this music that can be found out there. Especially, I had tons of it on CD.
Now we have to go find that first Brown Sabbath.
Yes, we got to find that. Absolutely.
Thank you all for listening, and make sure you are subscribed to our specific channels. Look for Steve on YouTube
Steve Carlson, Vinyl Community.
and look for us, Radio Wasteland Records, on YouTube as well. And we'll figure out what to talk about next week, because we're going to talk about records again.
Yeah, we will. You bet. You have a
Thanks.
good one, Jim.
Thanks.